Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I know I'm shifting you drastically to disease and disease pathophysiology. And I think one of the key things that we want to do today is to relate this to sustainable food systems. Actually, when I was going through this paper, my main intention was to bring out that the moment you solve food systems in a country, you actually almost solve everything in terms of diseases. And this is what I want us to appreciate. I've just picked one disease. In my areas of research, I deal with varied diseases. Diabetes, hypertension, all lifestyle diseases, and even infectious diseases and neglected diseases. So that has been part of me. Now, this was taking me back to my area of specialty, which is medical dietetics and pediatric physiology. And I wanted to link it to today's theme. But more importantly, I had an opportunity to read the Kenya National Guideline on sickle cell disease. And if you go to page 4, for those of you who can have that, I know I have my colleague here from the referral hospitals, including MTRH. You can download that document, the Kenya National Guideline for management of sickle cell or sickle cell disease. In page 24 of that document, they have written 3 lines, and I'm very precise, 3 lines, and it's called nutrition support. So just somebody has to open it and see page 24. 3 lines. And it is called nutrition support. To me, that was a disappointment of the greatest order. Because I just asked myself, were we invited to participate in this? Could we have given just 3 lines? So today was another demonstration. I wanted to use it as a demonstration that nutrition cannot be 3 lines in a national guideline on sickle cell management. It's terrible. I don't know. But I think it will go down. And thank you. So to the chair of KNDA Council, whom I think is participating, members of the council, the CEO of KNDA, Dr. David Okeyo, conference delegates, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take us through today's presentation. Sickle cell disease is a problem that we have. And globally, their figures are not there much, but it is estimated that we have up to now, about 300 babies are being born yearly with sickle cell disease. And many of them are in Nigeria, Democratic Republic of Congo, and India. Those 3 countries take 2% of this magnitude. It is projected that this number will surpass 400,000 by the year 2050 globally, especially in low and middle income countries and even middle income countries. So it's a problem that we have to deal with. One of the key issues is that it's a genetically induced problem. And if you look at my presentation there, people are born with it. And sometimes I make my friends and my young people, when I'm training them, that even if it is love, it was said that love sometimes is blind. But I tell them that for the first time in this sickle cell disease, love must have Googles, not just see, but must have Googles to see properly, and must appreciate that this is a genetical problem that can only be solved through that angle. You must know who exactly are you marrying? Are you really compatible? This is a fact, or else you will pay the price. And if you have to solve the problem, sometimes it is tough to talk about this. And I know many people ignore, but the fact is it begins from that end. It's a genetical problem and it's transmitted. And this paper explains the possibility of how to a birth outcome of a sickle based on those genetical transmissions. So it's a real problem that we have in the country, and we project it to increase by 2050 to 400,000, as I've said. It is estimated that 40% of the people in some of the African countries have sickle cell trait. Sickle cell trait does not mean sickle cell disease, okay? While in countries with poor resources, we have more than 90% of those children with sickle cell disease particularly do not survive to adulthood. Most of them, as Dr. K had already indicated in my abstract, die by the age of 5. And about 1,000 children in Africa are born with sickle cell disease, okay? They will actually present symptomatically every day. And more than half, 50% of this actually die before their 5 years. Now, there are 3 types of sickle cell, which I would want us to get acquainted to. I know the most common one that we always witness is the sickle cell disease, particularly sickle cell anemia. We have the sickle cell anemia as one type of sickle cell, which is basically HBSS, or what we call SCA, sickle cell anemia. The second sickle cell that we have is the hemoglobin sickle cell, which is basically HBSC. Then we have the thalassemia sickle cell, which is basically the hemoglobin SB. Yes. So yeah, just go there. You just leave the picture. I will present from there. So in Kenya, let me come home now. In Kenya, the disease burden of sickle cell is estimated at 4,000 that we have in Kenya. And these 4,000 children, we also estimate that a total of 21. And I want to take you back. In areas where this sickle cell is most prevalent are basically associated with malaria belt zones or malaria endemic zones. So in Kenya, it is mainly on the western side of Kenya, that's along Lake Victoria, mainly the counties of Kakamega, or the entire western counties and the entire Nyanza counties. Then it jumps and then goes to the coast. So coast region and the western region have borne the burden of sickle cell disease. And particularly in Kisumu, a total of 21 children out of 100 are born with sickle cell. And this you can refer to the county government of Kisumu, 26th of January 2023 on their website. In general, the likelihood of parents getting children with sickle cell disease varies based on those specific traits. Particularly, it will be 25% chance, a quarter chance that you will have a sickle cell baby if you are a carrier of particularly HBAS. And if you go to HBAS there, the trait that is indicated up there. And if one parent has HBAS, which is at symptomatic stage, there's 50% chance. If both parents are sicklers, it's 100% that they will have a sickler baby. That is why love must not just see, but must have Google to see properly. With that background, let's move. I would like to use that for you to be able to understand what sickle cell does, pathophysiology of sickle cell. So basically this trait, just go back. We'll just go back to the red blood cells. No, go back, yes. Just leave it there. That's a normal red blood cells, the one that you can see there. It's actually a biconcave disc, and its role is to be able to carry oxygen from the lungs and distribute it to respiratory cells. However, in a sickle cell, it turns to that. So limiting its capacity to be able to carry oxygen. Now, the other problem, just move to the next. Move to the next picture. The other problem that is likely to come about is that once it is sickle shaped, it's the ability of the red blood cells to penetrate through the vascular system is limited. So it sticks to the endothelial tissues and sometimes can end up blocking the endothelial tissues, causing non-transmission of nutrients to the targeted organ. Now, that can lead to a number of things. It can lead to organ failure. If it targets the brain, it can lead to stroke. It can lead to many things that will result from that. And I'm explaining this so that when I'm going to carry this to the dietetics, you will be able to see what we are managing using the nutrition problem. I mean, the nutrition or dietary solutions to be able to solve the issues. So that problem which I've explained is called vaso-occlusion, and it is referred to as vaso-occlusion crisis. When it happens, the baby will present with pains, a lot of pains, joint pains, and very uncomfortable for the family, isn't it? That is on sickle cell disease. So when you see VOC, that means vaso-occlusion crisis. It mainly happens with those sickle cell. The other component that you also need to be aware is that children with sickle cell disease also have anemia. And that is why it is called sickle cell anemia, which is very, very chronic. Of course, apart from the inability to be able to carry red blood cells, there are also few. And one key thing that you also need to be aware of physiologically is that the rate of turnover. Ideally, how long should a red blood cell take in the body? 100 and what? 121 days. That's about 3 months. Huh? 121 days, 30, for about 4 months. Then they are actually supposed to be regenerated. Our megakaryocytes, or the bone marrows are generating. For these children, theirs is very different. They're actually doing it faster. So they end up with very young red blood cells. We call them reticulocytes, which have no capacity to be able to deliver. And one problem about reticulocytes, they are also sticking, just like the sickle cell, they keep on sticking into the endothelial tissues and having high chances of causing a blockage or thrombus or what you call clot that can travel to any part of the body, okay, and cause problems. So these are some of the issues that you'll need to address. And I will pick all those issues I'm enumerating to dietetics. So with that, dietary management of VOCs comes in. And the vaso-occlusion crisis, by its explanation, when you take this child to the hospital, they will be prescribed on drugs, specific drugs. And some of the specific drugs that they will be prescribed on are referred to as anticoagulants. Some of them are heparin, but for your information, some of the anticoagulants you're aware of include a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug called aspirin, or acetyl salicylic acid, which is used. Now, as a dietitian, that is an opportunity to complement that drug, okay? We have some foods, and I've mentioned them there, which when a child is prescribed on that drug, then you complement, you increase the potentiality of those anticoagulants. And one of them is tomatoes. I had to use as plain language as possible. Ginseng, and I talked about ginseng in here, and garlic. My colleague dietitian, Prof, is here, who does this so often, and I've read a lot of our papers on that. When you look at that, then it means even at treatment level, this is one of the key things that nutritionists have to focus on. Once a child is prescribed a particular drug, which food is going to potentiate that drug to be able to. And there are foods that will actually depotentiate, not listed them here, which needs to be avoided in the process of this treatment. Any food that is rich in vitamin K must be contraindicated, because vitamin K does what? It actually increases coagulation instead of, and your problem here will be the clots. So let me go to targeted food-based recommendations for nutrients and diet in sickle cell. Jump into the next. Now, one of the key things that I want to pick here is that micronutrients have been well researched, and their supplementation into sickle cell. And some of the covered micronutrients there are zinc, copper, folic acid, pyridoxine, vitamin E. And more recently, cyanocobalamin, vitamin B6, vitamin B12, and pyridoxine, vitamin B6, have also been brought into the fold. Of course, we are always aware that pyridoxine and cyanocobalamin deficiencies will lead to megaloblastic anemia. But now their importance into the sickle cell has now come in very, very strongly. In addition, the fatty acid, particularly the omega-3 fatty acid, the linoleic, linolenic, and oleic acids, have also come in very strongly as some of the nutrients that need to be included, and they're being used in the facility. What I'm not sure is whether the practice is what I'm talking about, because I can't practice everywhere. Vitamin D is also there very strongly. And by the way, most of these children, when you look at them, one of the key problems they will have is osteopenia and osteoporosis. So vitamin D becomes a real issue. One, because because of lack of movement, they're not taken out for the sun, but we also encourage them to be on a diet that is rich on vitamin D. That's going to help. So the standard treatment mainly will cover that. Now, what was not known, and that is forming part of my presentation, is that the general macronutrient is also a problem. The requirements for nutrient needs of children with sickle cell is higher than normal children. And ideally, which can be picked up by clinical nutritionists, is that we need to develop a separate recommended dietary allowances for these children, which is not away from the normal. And I've attempted to do that in this paper that I'm presenting, based on their requirements, based on etiologenesis question adjustments, which takes into consideration the disease standards or the disease stress factor. So protein and energy ratio is a significant determinant of dietary adequacy for these children, which we need to take in. And some trials that have been done, especially on animals, have showed the trending increase in weight gain, particularly at S35 and S20. When it was done with those mice, it was suggesting that we managed to reduce the inflammatory protein, that is the C-creative protein, and interleukin 6L decreased significantly, and therefore helping in reducing disease-associated inflammations. Then it is also helping in reducing the characteristics that make that disease very uncomfortable. So that's the data that I'm talking about, is presented there. Let's move to energy requirements. I would like you to know that adults and children with sickle cell anemia have relative energy shortage because of the high metabolic rate that they have. There is hypermetabolism state that's associated with higher energy requirements, especially in sickle cell anemia. Investigations demonstrate that increase in urea kinetics, which is as a result of protein catabolism, erythropoiesis, myocardial energy expenditure, and pro-inflammatory cytokines are significant contributors to the increased energy demands in children with sickle cell anemia, or even adults for that matter. So in sickle cell disease patients, nutrients from diet are very critical. And more importantly, in this case, the high energy, high protein ratio. I would like to pick on a specific amino acid. Take me to arginine. One of the key protein that you're going to check on, or amino acid critical for these children, other than what is an hydroxyurea, which is the standard treatment in Kenya. They use a drug called hydroxyurea, and hydroxyurea is also just an amino acid, glycine, for your information. This arginine comes in very strongly as a macronutrient that is required to be able to manage sickle cell disease. The amino acid arginine plays a vital role in the synthesis of nitric oxide in the endothelial cell. And I told you one of the key problems is the adhesion of these red blood cells at the endothelium. And that is why it will always result into blood clot, isn't it? That will block the supply of blood to the targeted organ or to tissues, denying them oxygen and nutrients. Arginine comes in very strongly because it helps in the generation of nitric oxide. And I want to explain what is the role of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide stimulates muscle cell to relax, thereby regulating blood flow, blood pressure through dilation. And by the way, one of the complications that you realize with these children also is high blood pressure. Uncontrolled blood pressure, they lose it, and that has to be managed. Arginine metabolism is usually impaired in children with sickle cell disease and contributes to that problem that I've talked about, endothelial dysfunction. And it is one of the major causes of the vaso-occlusion crisis that we will always witness in our hospitals. Those who are in the hospitals, they'll come with vaso-occlusion crisis. It is the arginine that has been affected. Whether this is a common knowledge to physicians, I don't, but most likely it's a common knowledge. The only thing is that management sometimes become a problem. So arginine deficiency in these children develops over time because of this impairment in terms of its utilization in the body. Over a period of time, as they grow to adulthood, they develop what is referred to as arginine deficiency, particularly arginine deficiency. And therefore, the syndromes around arginine deficiency becomes real as they grow up. By adulthood, they'll have almost a continuous low state of arginine in their blood. Now, due to the interaction between arginine availability in the body and the nitric oxide levels, there'll be lack of adequate amounts of arginine, which then leads to the disruption of vascular homeostasis and oxidative stress. So the other key problem that you deal with there is oxidative stress. Therefore, in sickle cell disease, those of you who are nutritionists are aware that arginine is not an essential amino acid, okay? Under normal circumstances. For sickle cell disease, arginine is an essential amino acid. It has been renamed for sickle cell disease. And a number of studies have been done, which you'll go through in that paper, because this paper will find its way. They're just something that I would want to mention. And I want you to jump into my, I don't know whether I have, no. Okay, let's go back. Let's go back. Oh. Yeah, I think I'm in the last bit here. So some of those are there. Go back, Kidogo. The one slide behind. Yes. Yeah. No, I'm through with that. Just go to the next. Yes. So I was saying that there are a number of studies that have been done by somebody called Kehinda et al. To investigate the non-sickle cell anemia subjects that are receiving supplementation of L-arginine and those that are with sickle cell and are receiving the same. And the result is that arginine has to be supplemented for sickle cell anemia. The overall conclusion is that the products, and it can be in the form of RUTF. So we need to develop a product as that we talk to be able to supplement, because I don't think if we have an arginine supplementation as a policy. And interestingly, I read that document of the Kenya National Guideline for sickle cell. It is not there. It is not there. So I would like to bring to the attention of policymakers, and I'm going to do a policy brief in this together with Dr. K, to be able to make arginine supplementation a mandatory, just like folic acid to pregnant mothers, to these sickle cell disease children. Okay? So the other issue which comes out, now let me go to nutrition sensitive agriculture. There are specific foods that these children will require, especially to be able to deal with the total antioxidant activities, those oxidative stress, and I've listed them. If you go to the next tables, some of the foods that are critical here are the green leafy vegetables. Where is my green leafy vegetable? Yes, indigenous green leafy vegetables will be able to help us with that. Spinach, the radishes, the clary, and the mustard greens. Some of you are aware that also foods that are rich in some of the antioxidants, vitamins, particularly vitamin C, vitamin A, and vitamin E, are critical for these children. Some of the foods that are rich in that are, you know them, you can sound them, isn't it? Vitamin C, the rich foods? Citrus fruits, isn't it? You can mention one so that everybody can hear, so that they go and put it in that document. And it could not be put if we did have nutritionists there. Oranges, these children require oranges. These children require a lot of guavas. Now, this was not put, you will not find it there. So our nutrition sensitive agriculture is also nutrition sensitive in medical nutrition therapy, especially when it comes to those that I've mentioned. One of the key, of course, I've mentioned foods that are rich in vitamin D, which are critical. And our Brookside people are here. Yogurt is there, particularly fortified with the vitamin D. These children require that yogurt. so often. And when it's even going to be much serious when I'm going to take you to microbiome requirements. Microbiota, it's there. So I've attempted to come up, which is not there, I've attempted to come up with a list, of course, based on those calculations, to be able to come up with the recommended dietary allowances for every food. And you will have opportunity to read it. It's too large. I came up with some specific foods and their measurements per 100 grams, using some of the technology that my friend was using in measuring vitamin C content of vegetables. So let me just emphasize vitamin D and sickle cell disease a little bit. Of course, I've already talked about it. But as I've said, vitamin D is vital for calcium homeostasis, especially the 25 hydroxycalciferol or 125 dihydroxycalciferol. Very critical for these children. Vitamin D also functions to regulate the immune response and inflammation through its metabolites, particularly the 125 dihydroxy vitamin D or dihydroxycalciferol, which binds to vitamin D receptor to serve as a transcriptor factor, inducing vitamin D response genes that are present in the cells for our immune system to function. And in this case, even for these children to actually be able to sustain and protect themselves from other conditions. The other issue about vitamin D, which is significant, one of the key problems that you will witness with these children in the facility is pulmonary problems, particularly lung issues, breathing problems, okay? Those breathing problems will be supported significantly when vitamin C is actually supplemented. And when vitamin C intake is good, it will lead to the reduction in respiratory events, difficulty in breathing that these children will present with. And mostly, those difficulty in breathing are due to cardiopulmonary embolism sometimes, isn't it? Mainly, because that can lead, the doctors will discover that. But the origin is arginine and vitamin D this side, and vitamin D will be able to help that. So it must be, again, included. As you supplement arginine, vitamin D comes in very strongly. So the overall aspect of that review showed that the vitamin D has a protective effect and therefore has to be supplemented, especially for the respiratory functions of these children who are suffering from sickle cell disease. The 125 dihydroxycalciferol is found in a number of products. And again, I want to link it to nutrition sensitive agriculture. Mushroom is one of those products that you can target. Fortified milk, it's one of those products that you can put. Yogurt, fortified oranges, and fortified breakfast cereals. He was talking about, actually, we had already conceptualized a study to be able to have the cereals from Nestle. Yeah, it was called what? Weetabix. The main reason why we were targeting Weetabix is to be able to deal with the pulmonary problems for these children in sickle cell. The next, I want to talk about move to hydration, water. This one is the best practice. This one, medical doctors, I can assure you they do this. But we want them to do it with etiquette, not just for the sake of it. So we will tell them what to do. As we have said, hydration plays a very essential role in sickle cell anemia. For your information, cells become sickled due to reduced hydration. More cells will become sickled if there is less water in the body. So hydration helps in diluting the system and reduces the conversion of those cells into sickle as much as possible. Poorly hydrated erythrocytes will always lead to increased viscosity and may contribute to vaso-occlusion crisis. So one of the key things that all nutritionists, if you are not aware, if you degenerate into vaso-occlusion crisis, then one of the key things that you have to do is rehydrate as much as possible. Give the child more water as much as possible. The other thing that we need to come is the control of fluid electrolyte balance, particularly with sodium chloride. These children need to have reduced, just like any other hypertensive management, reduced sodium chloride, because when you have a lot of salt, in this case sodium chloride in the body, it increases the exit of water from the cells due to the osmosis, isn't it? Yes, and then it continuously desiccates those cells. So one of the nutrients that have to be controlled is sodium chloride. So there should be reduced salt intake. Of course, I said before, they also have high blood pressure as a problem, which has to be dealt with. So this will lead to that. Go to gastric microbiome or gastric microbiota, the gut microbiome. Yes. So gut microbiome contains trillions of bacteria. Collectively, we refer to them as the microbiota, and they play a significant role in the host immunity. Most of this that I'm going to talk about are mainly commensals, not pathogenic, okay? Commensals are those that we live with harmoniously. We have learned to live with each other as humans. Now, these are very important for sickle cell disease in the area that I'm going to talk about. While the balance of commensals and pathogenic bacteria maintains the gut homeostasis, which is very critical, the predominance of pathogenic bacteria in the gut may arise from inadequate intake of dietary substrates that are rich in microbiome, especially if somebody does not take foods that are going to lead to those microbiota, then it becomes a problem because it will be replaced by pathogenic diseases. So occasionally, these children will be exposed to suffering from conditions, including steatorrhea, which is diarrhea, isn't it? So to be able to avoid that, you must encourage foods that have this microbiota. If you move there, the prevalence of pathogenic bacteria compromises the intestinal barriers, and therefore it leads to the disruption of the mucosal T cells, homeostasis, and inflammation may result after that. So there is a link between the gut microbiome and many of these inflammatory disease, sickle cell disease inclusive. And these include those that I've mentioned and sickle cell as well. Now, one of the things that I would like you to understand is the arginine comes here very strongly. If you look at the arginine citrulline metabolic pathway, for those of you in biochemistry, I'm sorry for taking you back to this. There is something called the nitric oxide, which I talked about before, and which actually is the major factor when it comes to oxidative stress. There are studies that have demonstrated that the intestinal microbiome will facilitate the synthesis of nitric oxide. And it's a figure that is down there. Just take them to the figure. Just go down to the figure. Yes. So this is the arginine citrulline metabolic pathway. And the main target there is the nitric oxide, which is very critical in management of oxidative stress. So the microbiome facilitates that synthesis of nitric oxide in the gut through the arginine-citrulline pathway and human endothelial cells, mainly from the dietary flavonols derived from gut metabolites. There is something that I would want to bring in there called gut modulation of bioactive components of food sources, of dietary phytochemicals, flavonols, and amino acids like arginine, which I've talked about, that may aid, they will aid in addressing oxidative stress and improving both endothelial functions and blood pressure, specifically in sickle cell disease. And therefore, foods that I've talked about, including the yogurt, is very critical for these children. So you can see that your value-added products in the name of fermented milk becomes an important food, not just food, but a therapeutic food in the management of sickle cell disease. At the end of that, I would like just to conclude by saying that maintaining a healthy gut microbiota through adequate dietary intake of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and fermented foods may aid in sickle cell disease patient in optimizing host immunity accordingly. And that will help in the management of this disease and reduce hospital stay and frequency of admissions. Sorry, I'm about to finalize. I would like to say something on emerging medicinal derived nutrients for sickle cell disease. As nutritionists and natural product chemists and pharmacognoscists, there is a lot of interest in natural products, which is gaining attention as an integrative approach to the management of sickle cell disease. Those groups that I've talked about have had exploration for the use of extracts from plant like Moringa oleifera. This work is still going on, but the main focus you can see is on the antioxidants that those products have, including the phytochemicals, the flavonols, okay? And the role that they play in the management of this disease. Other plants that are under study, I've not mentioned, but even spirulina is one of them here. The phytochemical that mitigates the sickle cell disease include the Cajanus, Cajan, the xanthocylum, and the carica papaya, which is very close to the pawpaw, and which we encourage these children. And by the way, you also can use pawpaw as a fruit, one of the major fruits that is to be given to these children. So in conclusion, the focus of much research that has been done previously has been about increasing the red blood cells in this sickle cell. But now we are proposing that we consider and change to use food as a therapy for sickle cell disease and the symptoms associated with this. For example, individuals with sickle cell experience levels of hemolytic anemia, which reduces the ability to be able to carry oxygen or oxygen carrying capacity in the blood. And this is usually associated with increased rates of red cell production, which means there is a lot of replacement and there is increased reticulocytes in the blood. So young red blood cells continuously stay there in the blood. And therefore, there should be an attempt to be able to enumerate all those foods that are going to help not only in generation of blood. And by the way, you have heard me not mentioning iron. That is very intentional, because that is what they are practicing in the hospital. Iron may not necessarily help in the generation of blood. And my colleague nutritionists agree with me. Do you know they still use it in the hospital? And they have ended up finishing our children. This sickle cell, some of them have ended up with deformities because of iron overload. Very painfully. And they do it so often in the hospital. So my colleagues in the practice, I think we have a role to play to be able to change this and bring these components and reduce the use of iron and tell them iron will not help those children. Okay? Their problem is not about iron. They have all those things. The only problem is that this genetical issue. So giving iron is not help. So iron overload has caused us the deformities you see in those children. Most of them have been deformed, or some of them have developed conditions as a result of iron overload, but nobody wants to take responsibility.